Good evening. If you're on YouTube or if you're on the Zoom, just going to give it a few minutes like as usual, like our usual pause for letting other people log in.
Hi, Rabbi.
Hey, Aaron. I hope everyone else is doing well as we have a tropical storm moving up into Florida. I hope everyone is battened down the hatches. Looks like we should be spared the worst of it, but you never know with these storms.
When is it supposed to hit?
I think the beginning of it is supposed to be hitting sometime tonight and through tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
But it looks like it's going to graze the coast, maybe. And that's the Tampa side. So we're in from what I understand, the less destructive arm of the cycle.
Yeah, that was my understanding. Is we're supposed to mostly get a bunch of rain, right?
That's what I'm hearing. That's what I'm hoping.
This is Hurricane Evelyn.
Yeah, they ran out of names. So now we're going
Right,
to
that's
Greek letters.
frightening in and of itself.
Well, it's 2020, so you know, we should expect the unexpected.
Seems like you'll run out of Greek letters pretty fast.
I don't know what the next level is.
Yeah, then they go to Zeta, whatever. After Z, what comes next?
I don't know. Let's hope we never have to find out. All right. Well, I think we have our usual crew through Zoom and through the YouTube group. So let's go ahead and get started. So we are picking up in Mishnah Sotah, chapter 6, Mishnah 3. And we just have a couple little bits to do before we move on, in a sense, to a different topic. But I don't want to give any spoilers right now. So first, we're going to do a little bit of a logic puzzle. And you're going to have to just bear with me as we're going to walk this together. It is not immediately clear what's going on logically if you're not used to the rabbinic way of reading the Torah text. That is to say,
if two, Rabbi, correct? No, 3, 2.
I thought we did.
I mark beginning of the 2.
You know what? I think
my notes. I remember 6-2.
You really?
No, we're on 6-2. That we did 6-1.
Yeah. We need to start now 6-2.
Okay, that's fine. I had thought that we had finished 6-2 because it was a similar topic to 6-1. So good, we can warm ourselves up on 6-2, and then we'll jump into the more logically demanding 6-3. If one witness said, I saw that she was defiled, she does not drink the water. Right? So again, in this case, the nitmate, the phrase that she was defiled, means that this one witness saw actual intimacy, not merely seclusion. So if one witness said, I actually saw them, having sex, then we don't need to go through the Sotah ritual. She does not drink. That's just where we're done. Not only is one witness acceptable for this, normally, of course, 2 would be required, but even a slave, male or female, is believed even to disqualify her from receiving her ketubah. Again, normally the testimony of slaves, because they were not always completely free to speak their mind because of being in that indentured position, would not be accepted as a witness. In this case, it is enough. Again, the rabbis are looking for the clear text from the Torah, which is what we're going to see in Mishnah 3, and are trying to make sure we do not unnecessarily go through with the Sotah ritual. Her mother-in-law her mother-in-law's daughter, which would be her sister-in-law, her rival wife, her sister-in-law, the daughter of her husband are believed, not to disqualify her from receiving her ketubah, but that she should not drink. So these other women, again, who normally would not be accepted as a witness, are accepted in this case, in the sense that she would not be allowed to drink, but these other women would not, their testimony would not be sufficient to deprive her of the ketubah. Yes, Aaron.
Hey, and this question might be asked prematurely, but my understanding is the notes say these people do not deprive her of the ketubah because they would naturally not like her. And that seems kind of like a big inference with your mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and some of these other relatives.
Right. So yes, and yes, even more. So there's two different there's a number of different issues here. So one of the issue is that these are people where there was characteristic animosity, and that meant that their testimony, while believed in the sense that she would not be drinking, was not sufficient to deprive her of the ketubah. But there is an added element, which is that these people all are related to those that would be likely to benefit by keeping the ketubah payment in the family, so to speak. So there is not only an emotional incentive for them to perhaps not be honest, but there is also a financial incentive for their family for them to not be honest. And therefore they cannot deprive her of the ketubah.
But wouldn't the opposite be true? Wouldn't your mother, your kids, your because they would be your kids because they're her in-laws.
Exactly. Right. That's why it says specifically, for example, the daughter of her husband. That doesn't mean that it is her daughter. It means that is a daughter from a previous wife or from a second wife.
But it says the daughters would not inherit, right?
Well, yes and no. So, it's think of it like this way. If there was a lawsuit against your parents or anybody that you were likely to inherit from, or even potentially inherit from, do you think you might be considered as a interested party in making sure that the money that was being sought didn't leave the family coffers?
Yes.
That's really what the issue is here. Is if the money goes to her and she goes back to her parents' home, then whatever money was given to her in the ketubah has vanished from the family fortune, however big or small that might be. All right. Any other questions on this?
Even the mother-in-law?
Even her mother, even the mother of her husband? Yes, because she herself may not be the one that stands to inherit, but her husband or her son, your husband, would be the one who would keep the money, and therefore it would continue to his sons, continuing in that family line.
So the big emphasis on family wealth then.
Well, yes. And a short aside. Historically, I believe the phrase in English is "blood is thicker than water," and that has remained true. And marriage, for many families, for much of human history, was water. Meaning, until you had children and were embedded within the family, you were kind of still the outside person in the household. And that was doubly so in the ancient world, where women were not the primary holders of the property. So yes, that was a concern, whether it was legitimate, whether it was always moral or not. There would be an issue of potential dishonesty in these cases.
One final thing, though, doesn't the mother-in-law have an interest in kind of keeping the family together? Because divorces kind of take a toll on families.
Well, a divorce that could get rid of her without paying the ketubah, by all means. The emotional toll was not always considered to be enough of a deterrent to prevent people from behaving badly.
Right. But without that, without anything going, assuming there's no problems in the marriage except for this, don't they have
well, we do have a problem in the marriage except for this. There had to have been a significant enough problem between the husband and wife for him to have warned her and to set this whole situation in motion.
If the dowry was big enough to offset the financial interest, would a judge potentially say this doesn't apply because that financial interest is no longer there based on the size of the dowry?
I don't think that would be a likely solution. No.
All right.
Now, Rabbi, I'm still confused with the end. What does it mean? She doesn't receive the ketubah, but also she not drink, meaning she's divorced and that's it.
No, she does get the ketubah.
She does receive the ketubah.
Yes. Right. When they say that her ketubah is not made pasul, it's not made invalid, is the term used in the Hebrew.
Okay, so she is divorced with the ketubah.
Exactly.
That's why she doesn't need to drink neither.
Right, but even if she wanted to drink, she's not allowed to in this case. Again, the rabbis are setting up a number of barriers, as we're going to see a little bit more in the next Mishnah, to try and really make the drinking as rare of an occurrence as possible. And in the next Mishnah, we're going to see their textual justification for that. All right, so without further ado, Mishnah 3. I don't think I can get the English and the Hebrew on the page at the same time, so let's go ahead and get the English. Hold on, let me just get the English all at once because we're going to need to refer to a number of different points. Now, I will be zooming back or scrolling back up to the Hebrew a few times just for reference's sake to show you some of what's happening, which is clearer in the Hebrew than it is in the English. But I want to make sure we have at least the English text there to try and make sense of this together. For it would have been logical, right? So we're continuing this conversation of single witnesses testifying. So it would have been logical. Now, if the first evidence, meaning that the woman had secluded herself with the man, which does not prohibit her to her husband for all time, right? It's a potential prohibition, but it's not actually established yet. Is not established by fewer than 2 witnesses, meaning you need 2 witnesses to say that she was alone with Mr. Smith or Mr. Ploney. Is it not logical that the final evidence that she had been defiled, meaning she's had sex, which does prohibit her to him for all time, should not be established by fewer than 2 witnesses, right? So this is, for those of you that have done geometry, this is a negative proof. This is establishing a potentially logical sounding conclusion and the reasoning behind it in order to shoot it down. The Mishnah is doing that here. You see that a lot more in the Midrash and a lot in the Talmud, but we haven't done one of these for a while in the Mishnah. So let me just restate that again. The first part of this Mishnah is presenting a hypothesis, a theoretical argument. And the argument is based on what we would normally call a kal v'chomer structure, which means it's a fortiori, right? It's an all the more so kind of argument, right? If I'm not going to go driving when it's raining, I'm certainly not going to go driving when it's a hurricane. Right? You take one and you say, if it holds true in this weak case, certainly it must hold true in this stronger case. Now, these are slippery because what counts as weak and what counts as strong and whether or not there is a direct line between the 2 types is something that can be argued and discussed. And indeed, that's what we're going to end up having to do. Although in this case, we're going to see the differences based upon the textual citation. But let's just make sure we understand the hypothetical argument that is about to be shot down, which is her seclusion needs 2 witnesses. Now, the result of that seclusion and the result of the witnessing is that she will temporarily be suspended from being with her husband until after the Sotah ritual has taken place. If that, which is just a temporary suspension, requires 2 witnesses, how could evidence and witnessing to actual intimacy require a less stringent evidentiary proof? Certainly, 1 witness should not be sufficient for something that has a larger, more permanent consequence. That's the logic in the first half. Again, that logic, or rather that argument, is going to be undone by some text in the middle of our Mishnah. But I want to make sure you understand the basic logic that they have, which is pretty sound logic, if you ask me.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if doing it temporarily takes 2, why shouldn't doing it permanently take 2 as well? And we just found out it can be done with only 1. So here comes our textual proof. Scripture states, this is again back in Numbers 5, the text that we read at the very beginning, and there is no witness against her. And therefore, whatever testimony there may be against her is believed. Now, I'm going to scroll back up to the Hebrew here to show you what's going on. Right? Talmud Lomar, right? Therefore, it is taught, the ed ein ba. Right? And what's happening here is that the word ed, which means witness, is in the singular form. Right? It doesn't say edin, ein ba. It says ed ein ba. There is no witness against her. And that means it goes, right, kol edut sheyesh ba, right, is the typical shorthand phrase of rabbinic Hebrew, which means if there is any testimony, meaning 1 aid, then that would be considered against her, right? Ein ba, there is none, meaning absolutely 0. Yesh ba means there is more than 0. Right, a non-zero number, to use a mathematically convoluted term, that there is at least 1 witness, and 1 witness is enough to qualify as no longer playing by the rules of the Sotah ritual, which demands ed ein ba, that there is not even a single witness. So what the text is doing here, according to the rabbinic interpretation, is that there is no gap between 0 witnesses and enough witnesses, right, for the actual intercourse, because this is taken from the verse that's dealing with the issue of her being defiled, which, as we said, is a technical term for intercourse. So you have 0 or you have some, which is very logical, actually. And because of the way the text's saying that some is enough not to convict her of adultery, but to derail the Sotah procedure, the Sotah ritual of the drinking of the waters, then therefore 1 witness is sufficient for the establishment of intimacy. All right, Aaron, question.
Yes. Didn't we just learn that I was wondering before, how come those other witnesses, the mother-in-law, the sister-in-law, and those other people don't count if we're going off a scriptural read of more than 0 witnesses?
Oh no, they do count, but they don't count enough to get rid of the ketubah.
All right, that makes sense.
Right. It's in both cases, the otherwise impaired witnesses, excuse me, who would normally not be accepted, are accepted because, as we just saw, whole edut, any testimony, is considered sufficient. However, the ramifications of that testimony on her ketubah, that is still left for additional discussion. And that's why we see the gradations between the relatives and the slaves and other such things.
But if you have people, negative witnesses that cancel out the witnesses, then they don't count, right?
Oh, we're not to negative witnesses yet. So that's going to be a little bit further on. So we'll deal with competing testimony in a minute. Okay, so let's get back down to our full text, and we're going to continue because you're probably thinking logically, because you guys have been studying Mishnah for so long. Wait a minute, then. If it works like that for the defilement, for the intercourse, then why doesn't it work the other direction? Meaning with the seclusion. Meaning if one witness is good enough to establish the intimacy enough to derail Sotah, Why shouldn't one witness be sufficient for establishing the seclusion? And now with respect to the first evidence, meaning about her seclusion with the man, there is an a fortiori, a kal v'chomer, and all the more so from a weak to a stronger case argument. Now, if the final evidence regarding her being defiled, meaning sex, which prohibits her to her husband for all time, is established by one witness, which is what we just did with the whole there is no witness against her argument, is it not logical that the first evidence, which does not prohibit her to him for all time, meaning the seclusion evidence, should be established by one witness? Right? So this is how you make sure your mind is growing, is you have taken one argument, you have proven that it is wrong, in this case, by citing Torah text and reading it carefully. But now that you've proven the original argument wrong, what are the ramifications of that new position? Well, the new position would flip it on its head and say, okay, so I've established that in the stringent case of intimacy, one witness is good enough. Why would that not also be sufficient in the more lenient case of seclusion? And thankfully, the Mishnah gives us an answer. Scripture states, because he has found some unseemly matter in her. Now, this is taken, as you can see, from a different section. This is taken from the section of Deuteronomy that deals with the question of divorce. And elsewhere in Scripture, by the mouth of two witnesses shall the matter be established. This is taken from Deuteronomy 19. Just as the matter, right, unseemly matter, this matter be established, mentioned in this latter case must be based on the testimony of two witnesses, says it very explicitly. So also here, in the case of the suspected woman, the matter must be based on the testimony of two witnesses. What's happening here is what's called a gezerah shava. It's an equivalency of like terms. Because it is using the term davar in the phrase ervat davar, meaning the unseemliness about her with regards to a divorce, and because it's using with regards to generic testimony the phrase of whether or not there is a davar to settle the matter, right? Yakum davar, that the matter will be settled by two witnesses. Therefore, because we have davar in one case and davar in the other case, and the davar in the one case is explicitly with two witnesses, the davar in the other case must also be assumed to be of two witnesses, unless there was some additional text that would lead us to a different conclusion. For example, like the additional text that we had of ed ein ba, of there being no witness, singular, against her with regards to the intimacy. Okay, did everyone follow that logic? Because I know gezerah shava is an even less likely way of people normally thinking, that just because the same term is used in two places, that the same rule will apply unless there is evidence to the contrary. It's not the way we normally think in generic, day-to-day living, but it is a common used way of understanding the Torah by using every part of the Torah to understand every other part of the Torah. Right? The Torah is considered to be perfectly self-referential unless there is evidence that you are dealing with an exception or a different case. All right, either it's too confusing or my explanation was excellent.
Or we are sleepy.
Or it's late at night and it's still processing, and in 5 minutes you're going to say, wait a minute, can we go back to that? And that's okay, right? It takes a while for all of this to sink in. If you want to see more of the Kal V'chomer and the gezerah shava and those types of things, you're going to want to check out Midrash Halakha. Midrash Halakha is one of the earliest strata in the archaeology of rabbinic texts, and things like the Sifra or Sifrei are going to be your friend to help you understand how this sort of thinking works. By the time it gets to the Talmud, it's already been 500, 700, 800 years, depending upon which piece. And it's already assumed that you understand how this game is played. But unfortunately, many of us are not used to formal logic. Many of us are used to using logic just to get what we want rather than to convince us of things we didn't already know or understand. So you need a little patience with yourself to get the hang of this. And it's also perhaps good to remind you, the rabbis do not believe that new halacha can be established in this way, meaning that this is part of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, this is part of the received wisdom, and you cannot make a new Kal V'chomer argument, the all the more so. You cannot make the Gezerah Shava, the linguistic similarity arguments, all on your own, and thus interpret the Torah just by yourself. You can only use it within the parameters and within the stated places where it was done within the rabbinic world. You can use it to make an argument outside of that, but it does not hold the same compelling weight as referring to an argument that is found within the Tanaim, this earliest strata of rabbinic understanding.
So the bottom line is that the technique is that if you find the same word using in two different opportunities, you can compare them and connect them.
So the bottom line is, if the rabbis in the Mishnah or the Midrash find two words, they can use it for that. You can use it as a sermon, but you cannot use it to establish halakha.
But yes, at the sermon.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you can even use it to try and interpret halakha, but you shouldn't be surprised if other people will disagree with you.
Because,
I was just going to say, but with the way the rabbis do it, like in this case here, this we are not allowed to argue with, right? This is considered to be Misinai. This is considered to be from Sinai.
Because most of the biblical studies today, the comparative studies today that are so much in vogue, they use the same technique. They use, okay, look at this book, look at the other book. Oh, look how this word is using here. Well, maybe that's what it represents. For example, the parasha this week also with the, what was it in English, the part where he catch, Eliezer catch in Abraham. People think that is the sexual.
Right, under the thigh, yes.
Yes, under the thigh. They say, oh, how do you know that? Well, because you use the same concept, the same word in other opportunities, and that, for example, with Jacob and the angel, when they fight, and that's what represent. So they are using exactly the same technique, not for halacha, but just for understanding.
But that makes all the difference, right? When it comes to Agadah, when it comes to the philosophical analysis, or when it comes to just generic linguistic understanding, you're absolutely right. This is used everywhere. As a matter of fact, I mentioned something just last week during the sermon regarding the Haftarah, where the Shunammite woman tells Elisha, do not deceive me. And the term that's used there is a little bit, it's not like the word sheker, it's not a straight lie. It's related to the same word that's used when mocking Bar Kokhba of, Kuzbi, that he's going to be a deceiving redeemer, which he was. But the argument is linguistically, in other parts of Tanakh, that word is also used to mean like a well whose waters fail, right? You think you can depend on it, but then it stops. So yes, that kind of linguistic comparison has been around for a few thousand years. In modern times, people use it more usually to try and disassemble the Tanakh, meaning that they like to try and say, because the word is used here and there, that means they share an author, and it's not used here, that means it has a different author. So they usually try to pull apart the Tanakh rather than show its unity, which is a shame. So yes, traditionally in Judaism, you can certainly use it for Agadah to understand and create different philosophical and ethical insights. But as far as establishing the shared practices of the community, halakha, it needs to be at this level of originality from day one for it to be shared and binding. All right, so let's go back to our let's continue with our competing witnesses, which is going back to Aaron's previous question. If one witness, I think I can zoom in again. If one witness says that she was defiled, and another witness says that she was not defiled, or if a woman says of her that she was defiled and another woman says that she was not defiled, she drinks. So in both these cases, even though we would normally accept one witness as testifying to her defilement as reason enough not to have the Sotah ritual, because an equal witness is set against them to counter and say, no, there was no sex, then we are back into the pure case of no valid testimony against her. And that means we are left with doing the Sotah ritual, right? They cancel each other out in this first part of this Mishnah, of Mishnah 4. And that means that, again, we're back to Ed Ein Ba. There is no acceptable witness against her because of the cancellation, right? Positive plus negative equals 0. Yes, Aaron.
Yeah, back to that thing though, but it didn't say valid testimony or valid witness. It said no witnesses. And didn't they go to extreme lengths to say no witnesses by naming a bunch of people who were generally not valid witnesses?
So it's not a question of valid in the typical term that the rabbis use when talking about witnesses. So you're right. Most of the time when the rabbis are looking for witnesses to establish various matters in the community, they have a very narrow-ish criteria, certainly one that does not accept half of the population, women, and another large portion, meaning indentured servants. But what they established there was that, yes, some people who normally would not be invited to give testimony, that does not mean that their testimony is necessarily fallacious. It's not always false, but in certain cases, we are permitted to use it, like in the case of the Sotah. However, in this case, it's not about one of those witnesses versus a different witness. It's about two witnesses of the similar caliber competing against each other, which leaves 0 testimony. Right? It's not that there isn't, it's not that, yes, it's not literally that there is no testimony. It's that in Jewish law, testimony that is countered by equal testimony counts as no testimony. I know, again, in an American legal system, that sounds weird. Normally, we would just like to put the witnesses up there and have them fight it out until we decided who was more believable. And certainly, if there is any reason to believe that there is a falsehood, some sort of doubt or shadow over the testimony of one of the witnesses, that is always in play. But if you have two witnesses that are basically of equal credibility, then Judaism considers it the same as having no witnesses.
So
same, by the way, if you have 4 witnesses of equal credibility versus 4 witnesses of equal credibility that disagree with each other, you have 0 witnesses.
So you have 0. That's actually, so in a regular case, the judge never gets to weigh the testimony of the evidence, assuming they have equal credibility?
Assuming that they have equal credibility, that is the evidence. Right? If one person says the loan was for 500, and the other person says the loan was for 1,000, and there is no reason at all to doubt one or the other, and there's no reason to believe that one or the other is lying, no reason to think that they are, scheming, that is your testimony. You don't get something else to judge their testimony against, because life doesn't come with an answer key.
All right, but what about a situation like this where one says it didn't happen, and the other says, yeah, it did, he wasn't there? That would be reason to discredit the other one, though, if the judge finds it's possible that he was talking about a time the other person wasn't there, right?
Right, but you would need to have different witnesses to come to establish the absence of one of the witnesses so that they would be unable to have testified on that particular topic. Right? If someone wants to show up and say, Mr. Ploney can't be giving testimony for this topic because Mr. Ploney was with me and we were in Las Vegas, then yeah, that's a whole nother situation. That's where you can absolutely throw out someone's testimony and also get them in real big trouble as being, as aiding zomamim, as being these malicious, scheming witnesses. But yeah, barring anything that we can do to throw out the testimony of one of them, they effectively nullify each other.
So Rabbi, the concept is very similar to the one that I was today studying in Nedarim, that if you have two witnesses, one that is a student of Gemara, and the other one a student of Mishnah, the one of Gemara has more weight than the other of Mishnah. That's the same idea.
Right. There are different people if you're in an argument, and one of them has access to more material and would have understood it in a more refined way because they have advanced to the Gemara study. Then absolutely we can weigh their opinion in an argument more heavily.
So that there will be more serious witness.
It doesn't mean that
if they have clash the opposite views.
It doesn't mean that their eyewitness testimony is different. It would mean that if one of them was saying, I think the answer, I think the teaching on this topic is X, Y, and Z, they are more likely to be correct. It doesn't mean that if they say the car was red when they were talking about a traffic accident, that they're more likely to be correct.
But because you say that they need to be by the same credibility. So what happens if one is on Shomer Shabbat and Kashrut, and the other one is only Shomer Kashrut, no Shabbat? So one have more credibility than the other?
So as long as they are, as far as like men witnesses go, as long as they are baseline acceptable to be witnesses, that is to say they are not publicly desecrating Jewish law, and therefore we can believe that they are in the general reliable unless there is evidence to the contrary, then it doesn't matter whether one of them is always in the Beit Midrash and the other one is always working in his field.
So what makes different credibility?
So when I was talking about credibility, I meant the distinction the rabbis made between regular men and women or slaves.
Okay.
Yes, Aaron.
Hey, Rabbi, so is this to have somebody cancel out the testimony that that this happened? It would essentially be an alibi witness, right? And would they be discredited just by poking a hole in the alibi? So if he says, I was there, it never happened, he said, well, did you go to the grocery store for 10 minutes and leave them? Then there would be a gap in the alibi. Would that be enough to discredit a witness?
That would be challenging the witness themselves. In this particular case, they're challenging the testimony. So it's the equivalent of saying, I saw a red car, I saw a blue car. Not, you couldn't have seen a red car, you were with me. So in this case, it would be more like, I saw them having sex, and the other person would be saying, well, I saw them in the building alone together, but they were not having sex. That would be a witness that was testifying that she was not defiled.
All right. But if there's any holes in the, if you were to put a hole, what I was saying before, a hole in the time period when they saw him,
of course,
what would that be considered?
Then that would generally be considered, if you have enough evidence that the person wasn't merely mistaken, but could not have given the testimony that they are giving, the whole, you were in Las Vegas, how can you be testifying it? Then yeah, they would be discredited and they would be prosecuted for being a false witness.
Well, if you only stepped out for 5 minutes, that would kind of not really be a false witness, but that would be
correct. If there was a gap, if you say, but again, if you're saying, I saw them having sex, and they say, well, but you weren't there for 5 minutes. Yeah, but if I saw them having sex before or after the 5 minutes, I still saw it. That doesn't, it only takes a second. So there's actually a long discussion in the Talmud of how long it takes. It only takes a second, basically, to commit the act that is being described here.
Right.
So,
no, I meant the person who said it didn't happen. You'd have to show a 5-minute gap where he.
The person who was saying that they hadn't, yes, they would have had to have been a witness to their seclusion for the entire time of the seclusion. So in order for them to be believed equally to the person who said they did see the intimate act committed.
So to discredit them, you'd only have to show that they were absent for the amount of time the rabbi said, which you said a couple minutes.
Really actually less, but that's a whole nother discussion in the Talmud.
All right, but if you could show that, you could basically discredit the witness then as
Absolutely.
All right.
Okay, second half, and then moving on to Mishnah or chapter 7. If one witness says that she was defiled, and two say she was not defiled, she drinks.
Including if it's the one that say was defined as a woman and the two say not is a man.
Yes. Right. So if you have witnesses that say she was not defiled, right? What's being said here is that there is still enough testimony, enough doubt for the there is enough doubt for the drinking to still need to conclude. However, that's only in that one direction. If you flip the numbers, if two say she was defiled and one says she was not defiled, did not have sex, then she does not drink. She is divorced. Right? And that would be the end of it, because the testimony of one to her non-intimacy is not sufficient to nullify the double testimony of her intimacy.
Divorce without ketubah.
Well, that would depend upon who was testifying.
So in this case, doesn't affect the qualification of the people. If you have two against one, doesn't matter which level of qualification, it's majority rule.
As far as I remember, yes.
And Rabbi,
Mm-hmm.
both witnesses would have to testify there was no gap, right?
Yes, they would. Their testimony would have to be, rock solid for both sides. But that's a given in Jewish law. The rabbis were they designed their court system so that they could examine the witnesses very rigorously to see if there were any gaps in their testimony. Anytime there's testimony, whether it's about this or whether it's about a car accident or whether it's about who owes whom which amount of money, they would always vigorously examine the witnesses to make sure there were no gaps in their testimony that could have led them to make a false claim unknowingly.
Right. Yeah.
So that's always a given.
Yeah, I was just wondering if like each of them took a 60-second bathroom break, but there was no. I mean, one of them was gone for 60 seconds while the other one could see, and then vice versa. That gap would still be enough, right?
So those variations are wonderful for a different level of discussion, maybe in the Talmud someday. But for the Mishnah does not drill down that deeply.
All right.
All right. So from chapter 7 until the end, with a lot of digressions and additional information, we are basically going to be discussing the topic. Again, this is a large heading of what has to be done in Hebrew and what has to be done in whatever language you want, or what can be done in whatever language you want. So this is going to impact our Sotah ritual, but it's also going to impact a lot of other topics too. And those are going to be looked at in more detail. So we're going to get a good smorgasbord, a good range of a buffet of different topics where there are statements in the Torah of "you will say," and the question becomes, do I have to say this in Hebrew, or could I say this in German or Spanish or Aramaic or some other language?
I thought that in general, the rule is that you can say in any language, no?
Well, in general is too general, meaning that this is precisely where they're going to say, in general this, and in general not that, and then they'll go through the details. All right, so let's deal with the large umbrella of things that can be done in any languages. Okay. The following may be recited in any language: the section concerning the Sotah, the confession made at the presentation of tithes, the Shema, the prayer, what we would call the Amidah, the grace after meals, Birkat Hamazon, the oath concerning testimony, and the oath concerning a deposit. Now, these are going to be gone into in more detail, so I'm not going to spend too much time, any time breaking them down right now, because each one of them will get their turn.
Deposit of money.
Well, for anything, right? If I am swearing, that you never lent me your car, right? You never dropped off your dog at my house, right? That it's anything that I became the responsible steward of, right? That's the picadon that's being talked there, right? Was anything that I became the person who was in charge of watching over. Okay, so let's do the one that is, of course, most relevant to what we've been doing so far, Sotah. Sorry. First, we have to do the opposite side. I got ahead of myself. Okay, the following are recited in the holy tongue, meaning in Lashon HaKodesh in Hebrew. The reading made at the offering of the first fruits, the recitation of chalitza. Chalitza is when a man does not marry the wife of his deceased brother who had no children. So again, we're going to go into that, but I just want to make sure that that term was translated since it's not obvious. The blessings and the curses, these are the blessings and curses mentioned near the end of the Torah that are done from the two mountains at the end of Moses' life. The priestly blessing, the Birkat HaKohanim, this is the blessing that is done for, well, all of you, I think have seen it, Yivarecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, right? The standard blessing that is done by the Kohanim and even done in a slightly different form without the Kohanim. The blessing of the high priest, more about that later. The section of the king has his own section that needs to be said. The section of the calf whose neck is broken, right? The Egla Arufa, this is when there is a body found in the middle of nowhere. They measure the distance to the towns, and then the town that's closest has to bring out a cow, and they break the neck at the site of the murder. And the priest anointed, meaning to accompany the army in battle when he speaks to the people. Again, we're going to go through all of these in more detail, but these are the general categories. And these all have to be done in Hebrew.
It's very interesting, the division, because everything that is connected between we and God directly, it could be in any language, because you need to be sure that you can communicate. And everything that is pure, how do you say this, spirit, or pure, I forgot the word, like a priest, like a...
You mean like a ritual?
Ritual, thank you so much. More ritual, okay, specific ritual is more in Hebrew.
Well, I mean, I guess that's one way to look at it. I think most people would consider the Birkat HaMazon to be a bit of a ritual. They might consider the Amidah to be a ritual. It depends on your definition. And certainly the ones that we have in Mishnah 1 that can be done in any language include issues between us and God, but also between us and each other. I mean, that's what Sotah is. That's what the swearing when you're making an oath or swearing about deposit, those are between humans, even though we are invoking God in the process. So it's a mixed group along those lines. But what the rabbis are actually going to do, and again, this is going to take us a while, is they're going to try and show the textual proof of why each one fits into the different categories. All right, so let's go ahead and get started then with Mishnah 3. And this is the declaration for the first fruits. Go ahead.
Sorry for interruption, but we are now studied and we are going to study, so we can say that the Reform movement is correct in reciting the Shema and Amidah in English.
Well, yes. And in fact, before the Reform movement did that, every authority said that it was fine to do that. It was only after the Reform movement did it that certain people who eventually became Orthodoxy said that it was not allowed. The prohibition on using English in that case came as a reaction to and a change of halakha because of the Reform movement. So yes, there was more politics involved in that than just halakha. Yes, sir?
How can the Orthodox say that if it's written right here?
Okay, so there's the best. I always try to be as what's the right word?
Diplomatic.
Not just diplomatic. I want to present their view and as in the way
Impartial.
they would present it, right? To be as fair to their presentation, even though I disagree with it, but to be as fair with it as if it were my own. So it's not my position, but if I were arguing it and using their argumentation, I would say this. Right now, middle of the 1800s Germany, and many would say even till today, Judaism is under an attack. Our institutions are being eroded, our people are being assimilated, and our culture is being lost. And the reform movement of the 1800s, remember, was quite radical, not just in doing the Shema in English or doing the Amidah in English, but of changing major parts of Jewish ritual. In a sense, getting rid of keeping kosher, getting rid of Shabbat. Some even moved Shabbat to Sundays. There were major changes that everybody would agree were not in keeping with halakha, even if doing the Shema in English is. So, as an Orthodox, I might say, we need to put up a barrier to prevent that sort of behavior from entering into our community. So although, yes, technically praying in any language, doing the Shema in any language is perfectly fine, we are going to prohibit it temporarily in order to secure the borders of our community against this virus, against this invasion of ideas. And that will keep us safe. It will insulate us from the infection. And yes, technically, it shouldn't be necessary to make that rule. Technically, any language should be fine. But for the needs of the moment, we need to build a wall. That's the general argument that's used in the most diplomatic presentation I can give.
All right, so they don't believe it's halacha as passed down, though. They just believe it's more custom or tradition to protect the religion of Judaism, then.
Right, but don't make it sound like those are two giant different zones of behavior, right? A custom and a ritual to protect Judaism today can be every bit as powerful in the mindset of that community.
Right.
It's sometimes even more powerful.
Right, but if you label it custom, aren't you acknowledging that it's not accepted by everybody and it's perfectly fine to not be accepted by everybody and that it's only accepted by us? I mean, that's what a custom is, right? If
you agree that every other person who is doing the different custom has the right to do the different custom, sure. So, for example, the Ashkenazic Orthodox rabbis will tell you that your Sephardic Jews, your Sephardic neighbors who are eating beans during Passover are perfectly fine. There is nothing wrong. You don't need to be angry at them. That's their custom. They're allowed to. But you are not allowed to change that custom for yourself. However, your non-Orthodox neighbor who is doing something that your community doesn't like, they are not allowed to make those changes according to Orthodoxy, right? They have lost their privileges to have their own customs because everything they do is considered to be invalid. So therefore, their behavior doesn't count as establishing customary practice. It's basically like saying, the actions of some count as a legal vote, and the actions of some others are not legal votes. So, this topic comes up a lot when I see discussions by Orthodox and non-Orthodox Jews, that the fact that the majority of Jews aren't Orthodox means that the majority of Jews, in their opinion, their behavior has no effect on establishing custom or practice in Jewish law.
But if you acknowledge it as custom, though, how can you impose your custom on someone else? To impose on somebody else, you have to state it's halacha as passed down through at least the Shulchan Aruch.
Because they don't accept it as being part of the chain of tradition, the part of the Masorah. Because they don't agree with it. You're asking me to defend something that I don't believe.
Right.
Right? So this is a major problem, right? If you begin to pick and choose and say only those things that I agree with are the true chain of halacha, and anything I disagree with by definition cannot be, then yes, you've painted yourself into your own little corner, and you're now making it so that you can perfectly protect yourself from any idea or practice that might change your opinion.
But we have it written down right here, though.
Yes, I know, but they also have it written down from the middle of the 1800s not to do it. And that is their chain, right?
Yes.
And their chain starts with the Torah, moves through Mishnah and Talmud, through the Middle Ages, hits the 1800s, makes a hard turn to the right, and everything that didn't join them on that turn, even if it was a continuation of what came before, is now no longer valid. Right? And then within the circle of their community, that makes perfect sense to them. Right? That does have an internal consistency to it, which is we are the only ones who know what is right. Those who don't follow our ways must therefore be wrong. Therefore, their practices count as zero, as establishing any custom or behavior for even a different part of the Jewish world as being valid.
Because all the Orthodox told me that that the custom must be accepted by all of Judaism before it can become halacha. And the best example of that's the kippah. That's become law because everybody accepted it. But
yeah,
I thought if only a portion of it accepts whatever, and it's not in the Talmud or anything, then it's only custom or tradition at best.
Well, technically yes, but there's also a lot of argument within the Orthodox world of exactly the illegitimacy of non-Orthodox behavior as having no standing. Right? It doesn't count. And the fact that they do not accept it doesn't count. I mean, the fact that a non-Orthodox person refuses to accept an Orthodox stringency, such as only doing the Shema in English or in Hebrew, just means that their refusal to accept it is one more piece of evidence that they are illegitimate. If they were proper, they would agree with it. The fact that they don't agree with it means they must be improper. Therefore, all right-thinking Jews have accepted it, and that's enough for them to believe that it has been established universally, right? Universal among the people they count.
All right.
I mean, I know, yes, it is shocking, maybe even a little disturbing, potentially upsetting, certainly as it has been instrumental in driving a wedge between many different Jewish groups who otherwise could work together in better ways. But it does have its own logic, beginning with the idea that they can establish changes to halacha to protect halacha, but no one else can. All right, so I want to do at least one of these so you can see what we're talking about, and then we'll pick up next week with more. So Mishnah 3, how is it that the declaration made at the beginning of the first fruits must be in Hebrew, right? How do we know this? This is a common Hebrew word that's used in this type of question, ketzad, right? How do we know this to be so? So the declaration for the first fruits, you probably know better by the phrase, my father was a wandering Aramean, or an Aramean pursued my father, right? The idea is this is what we use as the core of the Haggadah for our discussion of the miracles of the Exodus. How do we know it? Well, in the Torah it says, Deuteronomy 26, and you shall answer and say before the Lord your God. And elsewhere it is said, this is Deuteronomy 27, and the Levites shall answer and say. So again, Gezerah Shava, answer and say, answer and say. We have the similar words used in the two different verses. Just as the answer and say made elsewhere, meaning Deuteronomy 27, must be in the Holy Tongue, must be in Hebrew, so must the declaration discussed here, the Bikurim, the first fruits, also be done in the Holy Tongue in Hebrew. Right? So again, it's by using the same linguistic, stylistic choice, they are saying the rule that is more explicit in one case must be assumed to also be operating in this other case. By the way, this particular case, the Bikurim, the first fruits, presented an interesting problem which was that this was a very, very long speech, and it's a very public and participatory act, meaning everybody is bringing first fruits practically. Most people were farmers, remember. So what do you do for somebody who doesn't have good enough Hebrew to do this? Because there were plenty of people who did not speak Hebrew well. Even during the times, during the waning days of the Second Temple period, Aramaic was the more common language for people to just chat in, and Hebrew was not perfect. Most, well, I don't know about most, but many people were not fluent. And what they established was a teleprompter, meaning that there would be a person who would tell the person how to do it in Hebrew and give them, like, word by word the whole text, so that way everybody could do it properly. And they would do that for everyone, not just the people who had Hebrew problems. And that was designed to avoid embarrassment, so that the people whose Hebrew wasn't so great would not be singled out for remedial instruction in front of everyone. So the rabbis were always very, very careful in any place they could to try and eliminate embarrassment. All right, so we'll leave that there, and we'll pick up with, and I'll try to remember, Mishnah 4 from chapter 7 next week. All right,
changing topics. Your former school is killing us. They do at 10 p.m. Really? Like in New York, they had the courtesy to do